Hi, I'm Tamara Lackey, and on this episode of reDefine show for Adorama TV, I speak with music, celebrity, and lifestyle photographer Dru Gurion about his progression from photography student to intern to assistant for years for the already iconic Joe McNally, to when he knew it was time to head out on his own. Check it out. Hi, Dru.
How are you, Tamara?
Good, how are you?
Great, good to see you.
You are here from Brooklyn, 8 minutes away.
Not too far, yeah.
And but you're on the road, what, 30% of the year?
Yeah, somewhere thereabouts, 30, 40, something like that.
Okay.
Yep.
And you and I met for the first time in Vegas.
We did a couple...
7 years ago?
Something like that.
Yeah, at Photoshop World.
Yes.
And at the time, you were working with Joe McNally.
I was.
Share the evolution of your very interesting and really cool career.
Sure, thank you. So I went to school for photography, and while I was in college, I interned for Joe in 2003.
Okay.
I had seen Joe speak up at Maine Media Workshops in Rockport, Maine, where I was taking a summer class at that point, I think like a Photo 2 darkroom class or something like that. Saw Joe speak, was incredibly inspired, and just sort of remembered his name. And then during school, I subscribed to communication arts, and I thought that the best thing to do for finding an internship was to look through the CA photo annual.
Okay.
And I flipped through, and I sort of earmarked every page that had a photographer's work I really enjoyed. Then I flipped to the back. At that point, this is like early 2000s. Emailing was of course a thing, but I just called people at that point.
Yeah.
And I looked at all the photographers who were based in New York. I grew up right outside of the city in New Jersey, so that helped.
Yeah.
But and I just started calling photographers who were based here, whose work I really enjoyed, and I of course saw Joe's name in there. Called the studio, and I think that's one thing that people. They're always like, wow, how did you intern for Joe? It's
right.
like, I called him.
Yeah.
And I was proactive. I reached out to him in maybe the fall for the next summer's intern period.
Right.
So I kind of beat the crowd, I think.
Yeah.
And Joe was cool enough to meet me at like an Au Bon Pain coffee shop on Broadway. Right. I brought my portfolio with me because I thought that was very important for an internship.
Portfolio.
I had my printed book with me, and I'm sure Joe was very impressed. He offered me a job, a job as a summer intern.
Right.
So had a great experience with that. I remember that the first shoot that we ever went on was at a medium security prison, and I needed a background check. Luckily, I had a completely clean record, but our first shoot was at a prison. The Wallkill Correctional Facility in New York, about an hour north of the city.
Why was that your first shoot? What were you guys doing there?
It was a shoot for Reader's Digest. There was a sort of a retired or abused or hurt former thoroughbred racehorse farm of sorts that the prisoners with outdoor privileges, that was one of the jobs that they got to do was actually to take care of the horses.
That's
and there's a really interesting story of rehabilitation for the prisoners working with these animals.
Yeah.
So it was a really cool story, and we got to spend a day working with a bunch of convicts, but it was very cool. And went on a handful of other shoots with him over the summer and just had a really great hands-on experience. So that was in 2003. 2004, I interned for Danny Clinch, a very well-known music photographer in the city. Had a great experience doing that as well. And I finished school in 2005 in Pennsylvania, and I was, at that point, I worked for an ad agency for a short stint for about a year. Quickly realized that the corporate world was not for me.
What were you doing there?
I was a graphic designer at an ad agency.
Okay. Did you have to wear like a tie?
Didn't have to wear a tie, but what was around like account executives and salespeople all day who I just it wasn't me.
Yeah.
And I was like a 21-year-old kid out of school, and it just wasn't my scene. I was in a rock band playing drums at the time, and then I had to go and pretend this corporate thing was not my deal. So actually a band who I had done a bunch of personal shooting with over the time, a guy named Will Hogue from Nashville asked if I would go on the road with him and shoot some photos and a music video, which is very bad and you'll never see. But I put in my 2 weeks and left this job, and that was the start of my freelance career. Smart move. So I started freelancing and was shooting lots of weddings and events, but in a pretty small market like Allentown, Pennsylvania. I think most people know about Allentown as a Billy Joel song. That's about it.
Yeah.
And I did that for a couple of years, and I also sort of stuck around there because my band we were playing a lot of shows and all of that. So that's sort of the tie-in to music and photography for me. It made perfect sense.
Yeah.
It was a great marriage of the two. So stuck around there for a while, but wasn't really producing the work that I foresaw myself doing. I didn't really know what I wanted to be doing, but it wasn't shooting 40 weddings in a year. Like that wasn't what I wanted to be doing with the rest of my life. So it felt kind of stagnant, and to me, the next best step was to apply to grad schools for photojournalism. That's really, I'd spoken to Joe about it. It was a recommendation from him, and thought that was a good thing to do. So started applying to grad schools, and during those years, though, during college and after college, I'd always stayed in touch with Joe and Lynn, his studio manager. And at that time, Joe's first assistant happened to be leaving. That's Brad Moore, who then went on to assist Scott Kelby.
Yeah.
And Joe offered me a job as his first assistant. So I took that in 2008. Kind of just jumped right in and started traveling like crazy with him.
Right.
Went all over the world with him.
That's why I was surprised when you said you've been traveling about 25-30% a year.
A lot less than I used to.
I thought it was a ton.
Oh, I used to. Yeah, and I worked for Joe until 2013. So worked for him for, I guess, all in all, about 4.5 years.
Right.
Or 5 years. And it was just an amazing experience.
Yeah.
Joe is a great, great guy.
He's so mean, though. He's
Joe,
so mean. If you don't know Joe, he's just evil.
Evil man.
Evil, mean.
And, you know, working for Joe enabled me to experience so many things in life, and my professional life and personal life and all of that. And I got to learn so much about running a business from Lynn, his studio manager, and from Joe, of course. Technically speaking, I really learned how to light and how to produce shoots and all of that. And I learned the business side from Lynn. These are all things that I didn't have the slightest bit of a handle on before working for him.
Right, which is because they don't teach it in photography school.
They don't. You know, I have a fine art degree, and like, what does that do for you? You leave there, and sure, maybe you're a bit more creative than you were before, but you don't know how to run a business.
It's fine, though, and it's artful.
Sure. Running a business is like, that's you know, if you can be the best, most creative photographer in the world, but if you don't know anything about contracts, if you don't know how to actually run a business, and that's a whole other conversation. No,
but it comes up, I mean, I've been doing the show for almost 7 years with people in all different creative backgrounds, top of their game, performing amazing stuff, and everybody is saying that.
Sure.
Like, so it's amazing to me that they're not teaching it in photography school, that it's not really teaching people, that they go years without ever getting that kind of message, that you could be doing great work, but it's going to kind of stay here until you figure it all out.
It's unfortunate, it really is, and the less that is being taught on the collegiate level, the more difficult that makes it for all of us to make a living, because everybody comes out of school, and sure, we all do personal shoots and free shoots here and there, but like, the less we all know collectively about contracts and negotiation and standing up for our rights, the more that does end up hurting all of us.
Yeah.
Because everyone is undercutting you if they're not, you know, of the same level of knowledge.
Why do I need to go to you? All these guys are going to do it for whatever. Yeah.
Sure.
They won't be in business next year, but I'll use them right now.
Yeah. So it's tough in that regard, but yeah, that's a whole rabbit hole we can go down, but we won't.
That'll be episode 7.
Yes, exactly. So I worked for Joe for quite a long time, got to learn a lot, and then in 2013 went off on my own, moved from Connecticut, where Joe's based, down to the city, and I've been here since.
What was the kind of jumping off point for you when you said, I'm going to go on my own?
That's a good question. I guess there's a couple of things for me. One was turning 30, which sounds weird.
What just happened?
But I had spoken, just out of pure curiosity, I had spoken to a handful of photographers that I respected over the years and just said sort of like, at what point in your career did you like feel some sort of a level of success? And for whatever reason, a lot of people told me like around the age of 35.
35.
Yeah.
It's funny because there's a whole rock star thing with 27.
Well, that's when they die. So we've made it past that. So that was part of it. And also just, you know, you get to a point, I've always been in this industry to be a photographer. Right. I was an assistant for a long time. I was a really good assistant. I wasn't a New York City or LA assistant who assists a ton of different photographers and is incredibly versatile in knowing like all these different lighting and camera systems. I wasn't that, but I knew Joe's stuff in and out.
Yeah.
So I was a great Joe McNally assistant, if you will.
Right.
But I knew
Which isn't lightweight, like.
No, the amount of gear that we traveled with all over the place was crazy. Yeah. At times, sometimes it was lighter than others.
I'm going to put up 400 flashes now.
Yeah, I mean, I know for a fact that at least as of 5, 6, 7 years ago, so certain airlines like Delta and American Airlines, they have a media rate for baggage if you have like a media credential. And I know, for instance, Delta, which we used to fly a lot, you can bring up to 24 cases of gear, $50 a bag, up to 70 pounds. I only know that because we've maxed that out. So, and I'm not like speaking down on...
That's crazy.
But like we've had, and I believe that was actually for Nikon D4 production, the circus shoot with the elephants.
Right.
We had a ton of gear and like literally lit a circus tent and like performers and all this crazy stuff. So we flew down with like 22 or 24 cases, then we shipped another like 10 cases of gear.
Yeah.
So certain productions do call for an incredible amount of gear. And the fact that Joe owns what's essentially like a small to medium-sized grip house at his residence, it's like, you might as well just fly with it because it'd probably be cheaper than renting it and all of that. And you can maybe rent it out to clients and what have you when you have that much stuff that you've amassed over time. Yeah. So in any case, the point is that I learned a lot about producing a shoot and all of that on multiple scales.
Right.
So yeah, but I was always in it to take photos. And you get to a certain point where you don't get burnt out. I mean, I think every year I sort of signed on for a year at a time. And every year when that contract was like getting closer and closer, Joe would just like spew out like, oh, I just booked this, and this. And it's like, we're going to like Africa and Australia and like.
Like maybe next year.
He made it so difficult to leave, and I'm sure he did that on purpose. But it was great, and I loved the travel, and I loved working with him. And it was just a phenomenal experience. So, but it gets to a certain point where you're like, yeah, if I'm going to make this move, I need to do this. Because it was, you know, after a while, it got to the point where I made a good living, and I had so many great experiences, but I just wanted to do something for myself. Yeah. More so. So that was really it.
That's it. I'm jumping out. You'd made really good connections.
I did.
And now what? Like, what do you?
Yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate in that a lot of, well, Joe always put me out there. Yeah. Joe was very, very kind, and not a lot of photographers that I've seen at that level are like this, in that Joe put my name out there. I was in all these videos with him. I was on all these Nikon shoots with him, and I met these creative directors, and there was always, Joe would always like introduce me as a great shooter, you know, and that was so kind of him. Yeah. Because for that reason, I built relationships with these people and became like Facebook friends with them and stayed in touch and all of that. Not like, the last thing you can do as an assistant is like go reach out and like, I'm not there to like poach clients, but you do meet people, and over time that develops into a relationship, friendships, all of that. And a lot of those relationships did build a career that I have now. And those turned into clients that I do work for on a regular basis.
Right. Thanks so much, Dru. And if you want to get better at the work you're doing, if you want to progress, check out Adorama TV and subscribe, because there's so many ways to get better at what you do.